From investigators solving decades-old unsolved mysteries to people spotting a victim's last cry for help, these are some of the most horrifying discoveries ever made on Google Earth. Imagine you're casually scrolling through Google Maps, maybe looking up directions to your favorite ramen spot, or checking out vacation rentals in the Japanese countryside, when you stumble across a small village that looks peaceful enough at first glance. There are people everywhere, sitting on benches, working in the fields, and standing at bus stops like they're waiting for a ride. There's a whole classroom full of kids sitting at their desks, and even a wedding taking place with guests frozen mid-celebration. All very normal, very mundane scenes of everyday life. But then you zoom in a little closer and realize something's very, very wrong with their faces, with the way they're positioned, and with the uncanny stiffness of their postures, because none of them are real. Welcome to Nagoro, a tiny village on the island of Shikoku, with a population of 37 humans and 350 dolls. This place has been slowly dying for decades, with young people leaving for the cities and old people passing away in what's become standard rural decline happening all over Japan, actually. Except one woman, 64-year-old Ayano Tsukimi, decided she wasn't going to let her hometown fade into obscurity without a fight. So she did what any totally normal person would do and started making life-size dolls of everyone who left or died, then placed them around town in their favorite spots, doing the things they used to do. Tsukimi moved back to Nagoro from Osaka about 10 years ago and found the place she grew up in basically deserted. And instead of accepting that towns sometimes die, she grabbed some fabric, thread, and an apparently unshakable commitment to preserving the past, and got to work. Her first creation was a scarecrow shaped like her father, because nothing says, "I miss you, Dad," quite like crafting a stuffed replica to guard the vegetable garden. But then she kept going and going, eventually making approximately 350 dolls over the past decade, each one representing a real person who used to live there. When someone dies or moves away, she makes a doll snitched to look as similar to them as possible and places it somewhere that was meaningful to them. The old man who used to sit on that bench every morning, he's still there. The kids who attended the now-closed elementary school, still sitting at their desks, frozen in time, staring blankly at a chalkboard no teacher will ever write on again. But of course, if you place dolls outside, they're eventually going to rot too. And these dolls only last about 3 years before they need to be replaced due to weather damage. So she's constantly sewing, rebuilding, and replacing them in what's become a never-ending cycle. She even made one of herself, because at this point the line between living and memorial is so blurred, you might as well join your own collection. In a documentary called Valley of Dolls, by German student Fritz Schumann, Tsukimi said, "I only think about the dolls. They are like my children." And the wildest part is that you can see all of this on Google Street View. The Google Maps car drove through Nagoro and captured every single unsettling scene in high definition for the world to gawk at. Tsukimi apparently hopes this whole thing will draw tourists, and honestly it probably will because people love creepy stuff. So next time you're exploring Google Maps, take a virtual stroll through Nagoro and see the classroom full of doll children who will never grow up, the doll farmers who will never harvest another crop, the doll bride and doll groom who will never actually consummate their marriage because, well, they're dolls. But if you think this is weird or creepy, oh boy, just you wait for this next one. On the night of November 7th, 1997, 40-year-old mortgage broker William Molt was at a nightclub in Lantana, Florida, just having a regular night out. Around 9:30 p.m., he called his girlfriend to let her know he'd be heading home soon. He was tired, and he hadn't even really socialized with anyone that evening, and although he'd had several drinks, he wasn't intoxicated when he left the club around 11 p.m. in his white sedan. But William would never make it home. His girlfriend reported him missing, and the police opened an investigation. But with absolutely zero leads, the case went cold faster than you can say unsolved mystery. There were no witnesses, no evidence of foul play, and absolutely no indication of where he might have gone. He'd just disappeared from the face of the earth. It would take 22 years before his girlfriend would hear about him again. It's now 2019, and a guy named Jerry Nyman was having what he thought would be a completely ordinary day at his job with the Palm Beach County School District's Transportation Department. His task was simple enough: to simulate school bus routes on Google Maps to make sure kids wouldn't have to walk near busy highways or any other potentially dangerous spots. Mundane stuff, really. The kind of work where you zone out, click around, and think about what you're having for lunch. Then he got an email from a nearby middle school asking him to verify if the current bus routes were safe, and that's when things got weird. As Jerry was zooming around Google Maps, checking street corners and traffic patterns, he noticed the school was close to his ex-girlfriend Erica's house. And because humans are naturally curious creatures, especially when it comes to places connected to people from their past, he thought that his task of making sure kids get home safely can wait, and decided to take a quick look at his ex's neighborhood instead. That's when he spotted something rather strange at the edge of a man-made retention pond right next to Erica's property. It looked like a white car, just sitting there in the water, visible clear as day on the satellite imagery. Now, most people would probably shrug it off as a weird shadow or some kind of image glitch, but Jerry couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about it. So he did what any reasonable person would do and texted Erica, asking if she'd ever noticed a car in that pond. She said no, which is already pretty concerning considering it was literally in her backyard for God knows how long, but she offered to go check it out in person. The problem was that the water in the retention pond was brown and murky, the kind of water where you can't see more than a few inches below the surface, so she had to ask a neighbor for help. The neighbor confirmed that there was indeed a white car submerged in the pond and immediately called 911. When the police showed up, they did what any good investigators would do and immediately started interrogating Jerry instead of taking the car out, thinking he might have had something to do with whatever they were about to find. But he explained that he'd just stumbled across it while doing his job, checking bus routes on Google Maps, which must have sounded absolutely insane to the officers trying to piece together what was happening. They pulled the car out of the murky water, and what they found inside was exactly as horrifying as you'd expect. A man's skeleton, still wearing a seatbelt, sitting in the driver's seat like he'd just been waiting there for someone to find him. The vehicle was so heavily calcified from being submerged for so long that it looked like something dredged up from the ocean floor rather than a suburban retention pond. The skeleton, of course, was whatever was left of William after being submerged underwater for 22 years. The car had been clearly visible on Google Earth satellite imagery since 2007. For 12 years, anyone could have zoomed in on that exact spot and seen it sitting there, but apparently nobody did, until Jerry happened to be checking bus routes in 2019. Thousands of people probably drove past that pond, walked by it, looked at it from their windows, and never noticed the white sedan just chilling beneath the murky surface. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office determined that William had most likely lost control of his vehicle and driven straight into the lake, and because it happened at night on an unlit road, nobody witnessed it. The initial investigation back in 1997 found no evidence that this had occurred, probably because the water was too dark to see through, and nobody thought to search that particular pond. That area was not even developed back then to begin with. It wasn't until the water levels changed sometime before 2007, making the car more visible from above, that it could even be spotted on satellite imagery. The circumstances around exactly how William ended up in that lake remain unknown. Was it an accident? Did he swerve to avoid something? Was he more intoxicated than witnesses thought? We'll never really know. All we know is that he left a nightclub planning to go home to his girlfriend, and instead spent the next 22 years submerged in a retention pond, waiting for someone casually checking school bus routes on Google Maps to finally notice him. But hey, at least William's disappearance was an accident, and that cannot be said for this next guy. In November 2023, a 40-year-old Cuban man, who I'll be calling Zach, flew all the way to Spain to find his wife, who I'll call Rita, in Tajueco, a village in Soria, so small and remote that its main attraction is probably the fact that it has a street named Calle El Norte. Rita had moved there without Zach, and after however many months or years of separation, Zach decided to make the journey to see her. He arrived in this tiny rural town where everyone knows everyone else's business down to what they had for breakfast, and then he just disappeared. After not being able to get in touch with Zach for days, his family got worried and reported him missing, and the National Police and Guardia Civil opened an investigation that went absolutely nowhere for months. They had nothing. No witnesses or leads. Zach had traveled thousands of miles from Cuba to a village with a few hundred residents where you can't sneeze without someone 3 houses down saying bless you, and somehow nobody saw or even heard anything about where he went. The investigation was colder than a Soria winter. Meanwhile, Google was doing what Google does best, sending cars with cameras strapped to their roofs to photograph every corner of the planet, including places that absolutely nobody will ever search for. One of these vehicles rolled through Tajueco, capturing thrilling images of empty streets and old stone houses. When the car reached Calle El Norte, the camera captured something slightly more interesting than usual. There, parked on the street, was an old red car. Nothing suspicious about that. But next to it was a man who I'll be calling Robert. bent over, putting what appeared to be a large white plastic bundle into the boot of the vehicle. At first glance, it could have been anything: groceries, trash, or maybe Robert was just moving boxes or whatever. It was the kind of everyday scene you wouldn't think twice about if you passed it on the street. So yeah, it looked completely unremarkable at the time. Just some guy putting something in his car on an ordinary day in a boring village. Google's algorithm didn't flag it, nobody reviewing the images thought twice about it, and it got uploaded to Street View like thousands of other mundane photos of people going about their lives. Except this particular photo wasn't documenting someone's grocery run. When investigators eventually stumbled across this image while working on Zach's missing person case, they realized they might be looking at a murder being photographed in real time. They traced the license plate on that red car and discovered it belonged to Robert himself, who was living with Zach's wife, Rita. You know, the wife he'd flown across an ocean to see. Coincidence? I think not. And they thought not too. The timing was either spectacularly unlucky for Robert or spectacularly lucky for the investigation, depending on your perspective. Police tapped Robert's phone and spent months listening to conversations between him and Rita, building their case brick by brick. After 10 months of investigation, they arrested both of them. Meanwhile, Zach's dismembered remains were found in a cemetery in Andaluz, just 12 minutes from where Google had accidentally photographed someone loading his body into a car trunk like it was a bag of potatoes. So Zach traveled from Cuba to rural Spain to find his wife, and she and her new partner, who she was cheating on him with, picked him up and dumped him in a cemetery. The only reason anyone figured out what happened was because a Google Street View car happened to drive down that exact street at that exact moment, turning a routine mapping photo into evidence that would solve a murder. If the car had passed 5 minutes earlier or later, that image wouldn't exist, and this case might still be unsolved. Instead, Google Maps became an accidental witness to murder, and now the image is blurred out on the platform after it already helped put 2 killers behind bars. But hey, mystery solved at least. But that cannot be said for this next case. In April 2009, a Google Street View car was doing its usual thing in Sonora, Mexico, driving down random roads and photographing literally everything for people who would never actually look at these images. Except in this case, the camera captured something that thousands of people would eventually look at, because when the car rolled down a dusty dirt road in the middle of nowhere, it photographed 4 masked men standing in the road, all of them staring directly at the camera like they'd been waiting for it to show up. On one side of the road, there's a guy wearing a scream mask, you know, Ghostface from the horror movies, standing next to another man in a Mexican wrestling mask, specifically La Parca, which is inspired by representations of death itself, because apparently a regular wrestling mask wasn't ominous enough. In the middle of the road, there's a dude in a werewolf mask, and next to him is another guy wearing a balaclava and a hat that makes him look like a scarecrow, or maybe just someone who really doesn't want to be identified. And all 4 of them are just standing there, staring, not doing anything that would explain why they're blocking a random dirt road in the middle of Sonora wearing Halloween store rejects. The image sat there on Google Maps for years, probably viewed by a handful of people who immediately clicked away thinking it was some weird glitch or prank. Then about a year ago, someone posted it to Reddit with the very reasonable question of, what the fuck is this? And the internet did what the internet does best, which has come up with increasingly unhinged theories about what could possibly be happening here. Theory number 1, the Day of the Dead celebration. In Mexico, it's a tradition for people to dress up in masks and costumes to dance in the streets and celebrate their ancestors. Some communities have dancers who dress up and invite passers-by to join them, and there's even a legend that says if you dance with them once, you have to do it for 7 years straight or ghosts will chase you. Wow, so spooky, I'm scared. But the problem with this theory, the photo was taken in April, and the Day of the Dead is in November. So unless these guys were practicing 6 months early, or just really committed to the aesthetic year-round, this explanation doesn't quite work. Theory number 2, they're just regular people celebrating Carnival or some other spring festival. The masks do kinda resemble Mardi Gras vibes, where African traditions mix with Christian celebrations, and everyone gets weird about it. But again, standing silently on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere isn't exactly carnival behavior. Where's the music, the dancing, the fun? This looks less like a party and more like an ambush. Theory number 3, and the one most people landed on, cartel members. Okay, so hear me out on this one. Sonora is home to the Sonora Cartel, one of the oldest and most notorious drug cartels in Mexico. They've been around since, well, basically forever, and they've made their name smuggling all sorts of drugs into the US, and they're not exactly known for their friendly neighborhood vibes. The area where this photo was taken is literally their territory, so the idea that these masked men could be cartel members isn't exactly far-fetched. Some Reddit users speculated that these guys were robbers who intercept cargo trucks on these remote roads, stopping vehicles and stealing whatever's inside. The masks would obviously help conceal their identities, and standing in the middle of the road would force any approaching vehicle to stop. Others think they could have been doing something even more sinister when the Google car rolled up, and they just paused whatever they were doing to stare at the camera like, "Yeah, we see you." The fact that all four of them are staring directly at the same point, which happens to be the camera, makes the whole thing infinitely creepier. They're not casually standing around. They're not mid-conversation. They're locked in, focused, like they're deciding whether or not to let the Google car pass, or turn it into another mysterious disappearance in rural Mexico story. And here's the thing, Google never blurred the image. It's still up there on Street View for anyone to find, frozen in time like some cursed screenshot from a found footage horror movie. Whether they were cartel members, robbers, bored locals with a questionable sense of humor, or something else entirely, nobody knows for sure. What we do know is that a Google Street View car drove down a dirt road in cartel territory, photographed four masked men staring directly at it, and then just kept driving. And honestly, that might be the smartest decision anyone involved in this situation ever made. However, this next one might come close. In November 2023, someone was casually scrolling through Google Maps' satellite view of downtown Los Angeles, probably looking up directions or checking out traffic or doing literally anything else, when they noticed something deeply unsettling in an empty lot near the Cesar Chavez Bridge. Right there, in a vacant industrial area, next to the Union Pacific Railroad yard, at the intersection of East Cesar Chavez Avenue and Mission Road, someone had arranged debris and materials to spell out massive messages on the ground. Messages that said "help" over and over again, at least a dozen times. And next to them, the word Trafico, and LAPD, and Federal, and Terrorismo, all of it visible from space, like someone was desperately trying to get the attention of satellites, planes, or anyone who happened to be looking down at this exact spot from above. The image went viral almost immediately after someone posted the coordinates online. People started zooming in on Google Maps, trying to figure out what the hell they were looking at, and the more they looked, the worse it got. This wasn't just one help sign, it was everywhere, scattered across the lot like someone had been frantically spelling it out over and over, hoping that eventually somebody would notice. And the word Trafico, which is Spanish for traffic, but in this context almost certainly refers to human trafficking, was right there next to it, because apparently whoever made this wanted to be very clear about what kind of help they needed. The location itself makes the whole thing infinitely more disturbing. It's an empty lot owned by Union Pacific Railroad, right next to their intermodal terminal, where freight gets transferred between trains, trucks, and shipping containers. You know, the kind of place where things, or people, could theoretically be moved around without anyone paying too much attention. The area is industrial, isolated, and not exactly the kind of neighborhood where people are casually strolling by and noticing things. It's the perfect setup for a true crime documentary. Social media exploded with theories almost immediately. Some people thought it was migrants who had been trafficked into the US and were being held somewhere nearby, desperately trying to signal for help using whatever materials they could find. Others speculated that there might be an underground facility in the area, some kind of hidden operation where people were being held against their will, and this was their only way to communicate with the outside world. Then there's the shipping container angle. If you zoom out slightly on the satellite image, you can see rows of shipping containers in the surrounding area, which only fueled the human trafficking theories. Shipping containers are, unfortunately, a known method for smuggling people across borders. They're large, easy to transport, and if you're looking to move human beings without anyone noticing, they're horrifyingly effective. As a matter of fact, I remember one of my mom's uncles being trafficked exactly like this decades ago. He survived, fled, and made it back home, thankfully. But he was a husk of the person he used to be after seeing what really goes on inside these containers. Many of his fellows spent their last moments alive in there. And here's the thing that made everyone even more paranoid. This wasn't a one-time thing. People started digging through older satellite images on Google Earth, going back months and even years, and found similar messages in the same location dating back to at least June 2023. The words changed slightly. New messages appeared. Old ones faded or got rearranged, but the theme stayed the same. Someone, or multiple someones, had been spelling out cries for help in this lot for over a year, and apparently nobody noticed until it went viral in January 2025. Local news picked it up. Fox News ran a segment where the host zoomed in on Google Maps live on air, showing viewers exactly where to find the images and asking, "What is going on here?" Reddit threads exploded with amateur investigators trying to piece together what could possibly explain this. Some people suggested contacting the LAPD, others said federal authorities should get involved. A few people even talked about organizing their own investigation, because apparently the internet has convinced everyone that they're one Google search away from solving a major crime. The proximity to the railroad yard only made things worse. Union Pacific operates one of the largest freight networks in the US, moving cargo across the entire country. If someone wanted to move people, drugs, or anything else illegal without attracting attention, a railroad terminal would be a pretty convenient place to do it. Trains don't get searched the same way trucks do. Shipping containers get loaded and unloaded constantly. It's chaotic, industrial, and easy to blend into if you know what you're doing. And then there's the question nobody seems to have a good answer for. Why spell it out on the ground? If you're trying to get help, wouldn't you call the police? Wouldn't you try to flag down a passing car? Why arrange debris into giant letters that can only be seen from above unless you genuinely believe that nobody on the ground is going to help you? Some people theorize that whoever made the messages couldn't access a phone. Maybe they were being held somewhere nearby and this was their only option. Maybe they didn't trust the police, which would explain why LAPD was written there too, like they were calling them out for not responding. Maybe they were trying to reach federal authorities, hence federal, because local law enforcement wasn't taking them seriously. Or maybe someone just wanted the world to notice, and eventually someone did. The messages are still there on Google Maps. You can plug in the coordinates right now and see them for yourself. Somebody went to a lot of effort to make sure that anyone looking down from above would see them. But while no victims of trafficking were identified after this incident, the same cannot be said for this next case.
Cleveland 911.
Hello, police. Help me, I'm Amanda Berry.
You need police, fire, or ambulance.
I need police.
Okay, and what's going on there?
I've been kidnapped and I've been missing for 10 years and I'm here, I'm free.
In August 2009, a Google Earth car captured a photograph of 2207 Seymour Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. It's a normal-looking two-story house in the Tremont neighborhood. Nothing remarkable about it. The kind of image that gets uploaded to Google's servers and sits there forever, viewed by maybe a handful of people checking property values or looking up directions. Except at the exact moment that satellite took that photo, 3 women were locked inside that house. Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus. They'd been there for 7 years, 5 years, and 4 years respectively. Held in place by chains, taken advantage of, physically harmed, and starved by the man who owned the place. And absolutely nobody knew. The photo's still online, by the way. Well, sorta. Google eventually blurred out the entire house after everything came to light, but the original image exists somewhere in their archives. A perfect snapshot of a house of horrors disguised as just another unremarkable Cleveland residence. So who was living there? Meet Ariel Castro, a 52-year-old school bus driver who spent his days transporting children to and from school, and his nights, well, let's just say, using the 3 women he'd kidnapped off the streets. Yeah, they really let this guy drive a bus full of kids. He eventually got fired in 2012, not because anyone suspected he was holding women captive in his basement, but because he kept doing things like making illegal U-turns with toddlers on board, abandoning the bus to take naps at home, and leaving a child on the bus while he grabbed lunch at Wendy's. Stellar employee. Castro was born in Puerto Rico in 1960, moved to Cleveland as a kid, and grew up in what can only be described as an absolutely screwed-up household. He was, well, forced into doing adult stuff starting at age 5 by a neighbor and then by an uncle, and bashed daily by his mother with belts and sticks. He got suspended in junior high for touching a girl somewhere, because apparently nobody thought this kid might need serious intervention, was a reasonable conclusion to draw from that. As an adult, he moved into 2207 Seymour Avenue with his girlfriend Grimilda Figueroa and their 4 kids. And that's when, according to Figueroa's sister, all hell started breaking loose. Castro used to hit Figueroa so badly and so often that he fractured her nose, ribs, and arms, caused a blood clot in her brain that turned into an inoperable tumor, and caused her skull to crack by throwing her down the stairs. He was arrested for domestic violence in 1993, but a grand jury decided not to indict him because why would they, right? Figueroa eventually moved out in 1996 with the kids, and Castro continued threatening and attacking her until her death in 2012 from complications related to the brain tumor he'd caused. So yeah, there were red flags. Many red flags. And nobody did shit. On August 23, 2002, Castro offered 21-year-old Michelle Knight a ride. She was on her way to a custody hearing for her son Joey, who'd been taken by the state. She got in the car, probably thinking she was just getting help from a stranger, and Castro drove her to his house, lured her inside, dragged her to the basement, and tied her up. He left her hanging there by her hands, feet, and neck for 3 days without food. Police spent limited resources looking for her because she was an adult, and they assumed she'd run away voluntarily after losing custody of her son. 15 months later, they removed her from the National Crime Information Center database, effectively giving up on finding her. On April 21, 2003, the day before her 17th birthday, Amanda Berry called her sister around 8 p.m. to say she was getting a ride home from her job at Burger King. Castro picked her up, took her to his house, and she disappeared. A week later, some unidentified man called her mother, using Amanda's cell phone, and said, "I have Amanda. She's fine and will be coming home in a couple of days." She did not come home in a couple of days. She came home 10 years later. Amanda's case got way more attention than Michelle's, probably because she was younger and fit the missing white girl media formula better. She was featured on America's Most Wanted and The Oprah Winfrey Show, where psychic Sylvia Brown told Amanda's mother, Luana, that her daughter was dead and in water. This devastated Luana so much that she took down Amanda's pictures and gave away her belongings. She died of heart failure in 2006, 3 years before that Google Earth satellite photographed the house where her daughter was being held captive, very much alive. On Christmas Day 2006, while Amanda was still in Castro's house, she gave birth to a daughter. Castro was the father. He made Michelle Knight deliver the baby in a small inflatable swimming pool and threatened to end her life if the baby didn't survive. At one point, the baby stopped breathing and Michelle had to resuscitate her. Castro occasionally took the child out of the house, even brought her to visit his mother, and told people she was his girlfriend's daughter or his granddaughter, because apparently nobody thought it was weird that this dude suddenly had another kid. On April 2nd, 2004, 14-year-old Gina DeJesus was walking home from middle school when Castro picked her up. She trusted him because she was friends with his daughter Arlene and thought he was just giving her a ride home. He wasn't. He drove her to 2207 Seymour Avenue, and she joined Michelle and Amanda in captivity. Castro kept all 3 women locked in bedrooms on the upper floor of his house. He chained them to walls, fed them 1 meal a day, let them shower twice a week if they were lucky, and made them use plastic toilets that he barely ever emptied. He replaced the windows with solid wood so no sunlight could get in, because why let them have any connection to the outside world? He would, let's just say, use them repeatedly. He injured them using dumbbells. Michelle was pregnant at least 5 times and forced miscarriages by torturing her. At one point, Michelle had a pet dog in captivity, and Castro killed it by snapping its neck after it tried to protect her. Meanwhile, outside that house, life went on. Neighbors walked by every day. Castro worked as a school bus driver. He attended vigils for the missing girls. His son, a journalism student, even interviewed Gina's mother for an article about the disappearances. Police visited the house once to discuss an unrelated incident, but Castro wasn't home. Neighbors claimed they called police about suspicious activity at the house, but police say they have no record of those calls. On May 6, 2013, Castro left the house and forgot to lock the inner door. Amanda Berry realized this was her chance. She'd been imprisoned for 10 years at this point. Her daughter was 6 years old and had never known freedom. Amanda screamed for help through the locked storm door, and neighbors Angel Cordero and Charles Ramsey came running. Ramsey suggested kicking out the bottom panel of the door, and together they did exactly that. Amanda crawled through with her daughter and called 911, saying, "Help me, I'm Amanda Berry. I've been kidnapped, and I've been missing for 10 years, and I'm here. I'm free now." Police arrived, entered the house, and found Michelle and Gina locked in separate bedrooms upstairs. Michelle leapt into an officer's arms, repeatedly saying, "You saved me." All 3 women walked out of that house for the first time in years. Michelle had been held captive for 11 years, Amanda for 10, Gina for 9. Castro was arrested at a McDonald's parking lot shortly after. Because of course he was at McDonald's. He was charged with 977 counts of various charges. Prosecutors were pursuing the death penalty. On July 26, 2013, He pleaded guilty to 937 of those charges as part of a plea deal that gave him life in prison plus 1,000 years without parole. At his sentencing hearing, Castro spent 20 minutes telling the court he was a good person and not a monster. He was just addicted to fantasies of doing what he did to those 3 women since childhood. He claimed most of what he did was consensual, which is a fascinating way to describe raping 3 women you've been holding prisoner for a decade. He blamed the FBI for not catching him sooner. He blamed the victims for getting in a car with a stranger. Then he'd switch back to apologizing, saying, "I hope they can find in their hearts to forgive me because we had a lot of harmony going on in that home." Harmony. Michelle Knight addressed him directly at the sentencing. "You took 11 years of my life away. I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning. I will overcome all that has happened, but you will face hell for eternity." Castro was sentenced to life plus 1,000 years. He was sent to the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio. 1 month later, on September 3rd, 2013, guards found him hanging from a bedsheet in his cell with his pants around his ankles. Prison officials initially suggested he might have died from autoerotic asphyxiation, but the coroner ruled it. 2 guards were found to have falsified logs documenting their checks on Castro before his death. So who knows what actually happened? Either way, he was dead. Cremated. Ashes scattered in an undisclosed location so nobody could piss on his grave. On August 7th, 2013, as part of Castro's plea deal, the house at 2207 Seymour Avenue was demolished. Michelle Knight was there, handing out yellow balloons to spectators, each one representing a missing child. Gina's aunt swung the crane that tore the house down. The lot is now a park and garden, and if you look up the address on Google Maps today, the street view is completely blurred out where the house used to be. But that satellite image from August 2009 is still in Google's archives somewhere. A perfectly ordinary photo of a perfectly ordinary house where 3 women were being held captive, and nobody had any idea. But hey, at least the victims survived and got a happy ending, which did not happen for the people involved in this next one. Okay, so this story has multiple layers to it, so bear with me. On the evening of November 13th, 1974, a 23-year-old guy named Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr. burst into Henry's bar in Amityville, Long Island, shouting that someone needed to help him because he thought his parents had been shot. Several patrons, including his friend John Altieri, piled into DeFeo's car and drove about 800 meters to his family's house at 112 Ocean Avenue, a 3-story Dutch colonial with a swimming pool in the back and a statue of St. Joseph and baby Jesus in the front yard. And this address is blurred out on Google Earth for a good reason. DeFeo stayed in the car while the others went inside. What they found upstairs would become one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history. Not because of what actually happened, but because of what people would later claim happened. All 6 members of DeFeo's family were dead. His parents, Ronald Sr., 43, and Louise, 42. His siblings, 18-year-old Dawn, 18-year-old Allison, 12-year-old Mark, and 9-year-old John. All of them shot in their beds, lying face down, still in their pajamas. Someone called 911, and when Suffolk County detectives arrived, they confirmed what would become the largest mass murder in a single incident on Long Island in recent memory. And Butch DeFeo, the oldest son and sole survivor, oh boy, he had a story. Apparently a mob hitman named Louis Fellini did it, he said. His family had connections to organized crime, so it made sense, right? Except it didn't. Because within hours, detectives exposed serious inconsistencies in his version of events, and by the next day, DeFeo confessed to attacking his entire family himself. "Once I started, I just couldn't stop," he told police. "It went so fast." He'd shot them all with a .35 caliber Marlin rifle around 3 a.m. that morning while they slept. The parents were shot twice each, the siblings once. He'd taken a bath afterward, changed his clothes, ditched the blood-soaked evidence in a canal behind the house, and then went to work like it was just another Wednesday. Because nothing says normal day quite like committing a family annihilation and then clocking in at your granddad's car dealership. So who was Butch DeFeo, and how did a seemingly normal Catholic family in suburban Long Island end up as the inspiration for one of the most profitable horror franchises of all time? Born in Puerto Rico in 1960, DeFeo moved to Cleveland as a kid before eventually settling in Amityville with his family in the early 1970s. The DeFeos were, by most accounts, a tight-knit, devout Catholic family. They attended church regularly, held Sunday prayer huddles, hosted neighborhood pool parties, and were generally well-liked in the community. The dad, Ronald Sr., worked as a car salesman at his father-in-law's dealership in Brooklyn. The mom, Louise, took care of the house and kids. Dawn was a sweet, funny teenager who played softball. The younger kids were just, well, kids. And then there was Butch, the black sheep, the one who didn't quite fit the mold of the perfect Italian-American firstborn son. Paula Uriburu, a Hofstra University professor who grew up in Amityville and was friends with Dawn DeFeo, remembers him as always lurking around at family gatherings. He seemed like a creepy guy, she recalled in an interview decades later. He kind of looked like Charles Manson. DeFeo partied hard, drank heavily, and had a notorious temper that got him into frequent fights. He'd bring friends over after the bars closed to keep drinking at his parents' house, which, did not exactly endear him to his father. And Ronald Sr., by all accounts, was not a gentleman. Neighbors described him as overbearing, especially with his oldest son. Some claimed he would, go a tad bit overboard with the whole disciplining kids thing, beating the kids with belts and sticks. So of course DeFeo and his father had a volatile relationship, marked by frequent screaming matches and at least one witnessed fistfight in the days before the average oldest son and father dynamic, honestly. One neighbor said Ronald Sr. would go on beating sprees on his kids and then pray in front of the St. Joseph statue in the yard for forgiveness, which is definitely a healthy coping mechanism and not at all a red flag. DeFeo also had a criminal record. He'd been arrested for stealing an outboard motor and was on probation at the time of the murders. He was supposed to see his probation officer on November 13th, the day after he killed his family. But obviously that appointment didn't happen because he was busy being interrogated by police for over 30 hours straight. His defense team tried to argue insanity, claiming DeFeo was hearing voices from the house telling him to do whatever the hell he did that night. A psychiatrist for the defense agreed, but the prosecution's psychiatrist said DeFeo had antisocial personality disorder and knew exactly what he was doing. The jury agreed with the prosecution. On November 21st, 1975, DeFeo was found guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive terms of 25 years to life. The judge called it the most heinous murders committed in Suffolk County since its founding, which is a hell of a legacy to leave behind. But here's where the Amityville story gets really weird, because the murders themselves, as horrific as they were, might have faded into obscurity if it weren't for what happened next. In December 1975, about a year after the killings, a young couple named George and Kathy Lutz moved into 112 Ocean Avenue with their 3 kids. The house had been sitting empty since the murders, and they got it for a steal at $80,000, roughly $450,000 in today's money. Not bad for a 5-bedroom house with a pool and a boathouse. On the day they moved in, the Lutzes had a priest come bless the house, because why wouldn't you, after 6 people were murdered there? According to George Lutz, the priest felt an unseen hand slap him in one of the upstairs rooms and heard a demonic voice tell him to get out. The priest, apparently taking the hint, left and later called to warn the family not to use that room. Spoiler alert, they did not listen. And then, according to the Lutzes, all hell broke loose. Doors were ripped off their hinges in the middle of the night. Cabinets slammed shut on their own. Green slime oozed down the walls like something out of a Nickelodeon game show, gone horribly wrong. Windows spontaneously shattered. The house was constantly cold no matter how high they cranked the heat. George would wake up at exactly 3:15 a.m. every night, right around the time the murders had occurred, because apparently evil has impeccable timing. Kathy claims she levitated above the bed at one point and was physically transformed into an old woman, which sounds less like demonic possession and more like a really bad skincare routine. George said he heard the kids' beds slamming up and down on the floor, but couldn't do anything because an invisible force was holding him down, which is a convenient excuse for not checking on your terrified children. Their youngest daughter befriended an invisible demonic pig named Jody, who would stare at her through the window, because why would an ancient evil entity choose to manifest as a normal ghost when it could be a pig? And almost forgot, and there were swarms of flies, in winter, in closed rooms. Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but that isn't something that just happens. After 28 days, the Lutzes fled the house in terror, leaving behind all their possessions, including clothes in the closets and food in the fridge. They told anyone who would listen that the house was possessed by demonic forces, possibly connected to a Native American burial ground that may or may not have existed under the property. Local historians and Native American leaders have since said there's zero evidence of any such burial ground, but why let facts get in the way of a good haunting story? 2 months later, a local news crew brought in psychics and paranormal experts to investigate. One reporter who was there called it a psychic slumber party, which is possibly the most accurate description of ghost hunting that's ever been uttered. The team took photos throughout the house, including one infamous shot that allegedly shows a ghost boy with glowing eyes peering out from one of the bedrooms. The image has been analyzed to death, with some claiming it's the spirit of John DeFeo, and others pointing out it looks suspiciously like one of the crew members who just happened to be wandering around during the shoot. The psychics declared the house was definitely haunted. Shocking, considering they were called in specifically to confirm a haunting. It's almost like they had a vested interest in the property being supernatural. The Lutzes then collaborated with author Jay Anson on a book about their experience, which was published in September 1977 as The Amityville Horror. The book became a massive bestseller, selling millions of copies worldwide. A movie adaptation followed in 1979 starring James Brolin, and became one of the highest-grossing independent films of all time. A 2005 remake with Ryan Reynolds pulled in over $167 million worldwide. To date, the Amityville franchise has spawned more than 30 films, most of which have absolutely nothing to do with the original story but slap Amityville in the title anyway for brand recognition. And the Lutzes, they walked away with a reported $300,000, though they later claimed they never signed a contract with Anson, and were somehow surprised that a book about their story made money. Mathematics was apparently not their strong suit. But here's the thing that should surprise absolutely nobody. The whole haunting story was likely bullshit from the beginning. In 1979, William Weber, DeFeo's defense attorney, admitted on the TV show A Current Affair that he, George Lutz, and Kathy Lutz had made up the entire haunting tale over many bottles of wine. They took real-life incidents, Weber said, and transposed them into a supernatural narrative. In other words, it was a hoax, he stated plainly, probably while wondering how anyone believed it in the first place. The Lutzes denied this, of course, claiming Weber was lying and that everything in the book was real. George Lutz maintained until his death in 2006 that the haunting was genuine, telling ABC News, "I can just say what I experienced." His stepson, Christopher Quaratino, who was 7 when they lived in the house, came forward in 2005 to say that while he does believe some odd things happened, his stepfather greatly exaggerated the events and was a professional showman, obsessed with the occult. George's biological son, Daniel Lutz, who was 10 at the time, went even further in the 2013 documentary My Amityville Horror, claiming his stepfather deliberately invited dark forces into their lives through occult practices. So either the house was haunted, or George Lutz was really committed to creating a media sensation. You decide which is more plausible. Every family that's lived at 112 Ocean Avenue since the Lutzes, and there have been several, has reported zero paranormal activity. No demons, no slime, no levitation, no homicidal pig ghosts, just a regular house where a horrific crime once occurred. The address was eventually changed from 112 to 108 Ocean Avenue to deter tourists, and the iconic quarter-circle windows that looked like eyes staring out at the street were replaced with normal windows to make the house less recognizable. Meanwhile, back in prison, Butch DeFeo was busy creating his own fictional universe about what happened on November 13th, 1974. His story changed more times than a politician's campaign promises. First, it was a mob hit. Then, he acted alone. Then, in a 1986 interview with Newsday, he claimed his sister Dawn killed their father. Their mother killed the younger siblings in a grief-fueled rage, and he only killed his mother. He said he took the blame because he was afraid of his mother's father and his own father's uncle, Peter DeFeo, who was allegedly a capo regime in the Genovese crime family. He also suddenly remembered that he was married at the time to a woman named Geraldine Gates and was living in New Jersey, only returning to Amityville that night because his mother called, asking him to break up a fight between Dawn and their father. His brother-in-law, Richard Raimondo, was supposedly with him the whole time and could verify everything. In 1990, DeFeo filed a motion to have his conviction overturned, this time claiming Dawn and an unknown accomplice killed the parents, Dawn killed the siblings, and he only killed Dawn by accident while they struggled over the rifle. Again, he insisted he was married to Geraldine, and that her brother Richard could testify to his whereabouts. There was just one tiny problem. Richard Raimondo didn't exist. Prosecutors presented evidence that he was a completely fabricated person. Geraldine Gates, who very much did exist, was living upstate married to someone else at the time of the murders. She later admitted under oath that she didn't actually marry DeFeo until 1989, right before he filed his motion for a new trial. Convenient timing. The judge denied the motion, writing that DeFeo's testimony was false and fabricated, and incredible and not worthy of belief, which is legal speak for "this is absolute horseshit." In 2000, DeFeo met with investigative journalist Rick Osuna for about 6 hours. According to Osuna, DeFeo spun yet another version. He and Dawn planned to kill their parents together out of desperation to escape their father's abuse, but Dawn went rogue and murdered the younger siblings to eliminate witnesses. DeFeo claimed he was so enraged that he knocked Dawn unconscious and shot her. Some DeFeo truthers have pointed to the fact that unburned gunpowder was found on Dawn's nightgown as evidence she fired a weapon. However, the ballistics expert at trial explained that unburned gunpowder is discharged through the muzzle of a gun, meaning Dawn was simply in close proximity to the rifle when it was fired at her, not that she fired it herself. This was confirmed by multiple experts, but facts have never stopped conspiracy theorists from theorizing. Osuna, who literally wrote a book called The Night the DeFeos Died, believes there's evidence suggesting Dawn may have been involved. He points to crime scene inconsistencies, like how all 6 victims were found face down in their beds with no signs of struggle, and how nobody in the neighborhood reported hearing gunshots despite the rifle not being fitted with a suppressor. He questions how one person could walk through a 3-story house shooting 6 people on different floors without anyone waking up or attempting to flee. These are valid questions, but they're also questions that have plagued countless family annihilation cases throughout history. The answers are usually far less interesting than the victims were drugged, or there was a conspiracy. Sometimes people just sleep through things. Sometimes shock and fear freeze people in place. And sometimes killers get lucky, and nobody wakes up in time to escape. It's horrifying, but it happens. Paula Uruburu, who knew the family personally, scoffs at the idea that Dawn was involved. Blaming his sister was just ridiculous, she told reporters. He always looked for a scapegoat. He had a persecution complex and a delusional personality. She believes DeFeo's motive was primarily financial, combined with years of resentment toward his father and jealousy over the attention his siblings received. At a 1999 parole hearing, DeFeo claimed he was in the basement with a friend when he heard a noise. He ran upstairs and saw Allison dead in her bed with blood everywhere. He didn't even check on his brothers in the next room, but ran straight upstairs where Dawn allegedly said, "Oh my God, Butch, you're not supposed to be here." He testified there were serious family problems, and that he and Dawn wanted to escape because they were like animals, like dogs on leashes, always beat up and abused by my father. But even if Ronald Sr. was abusive, even if there was dysfunction in the family, even if DeFeo felt trapped and desperate, that doesn't explain or excuse gunning down 4 children in their sleep. His 2 youngest brothers were 12 and 9. Allison was 13. They had nothing to do with whatever conflict existed between DeFeo and his father. They were just kids who never woke up on November 13, 1974. At his sentencing in 1975, Judge Thomas Stark heard from the victims' loved ones. The prosecutor argued that DeFeo's motive was financial, pointing to the fact that DeFeo had asked police what he needed to do to collect on his father's life insurance policies almost immediately after the bodies were discovered. Which is certainly a question you ask when you're grieving and not at all suspicious. DeFeo was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, 25 years to life on each count. He was sent to Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York, where he would spend the next 46 years filing appeals, requesting parole hearings, and coming up with new versions of what happened that night. Every appeal was denied. Every parole request was rejected. On March 12, 2021, Ronald DeFeo Jr. died in his prison cell at age 69. The official cause of death was never released to the public, but it doesn't really matter. He died having never told the truth about what actually happened, having spent nearly 5 decades manipulating and lying to anyone who would listen, and having turned his family's murder into a cottage industry that enriched everyone except the people who deserved compensation. Dawn DeFeo wanted to go to college. Allison loved her pink and yellow flowered wallpaper. Mark was recovering from a football injury. John probably had a favorite toy. Ronald Sr. went to work every day. Louise took care of her kids and went to church and hosted pool parties for the neighborhood. And they all died face down in their beds, shot in the back by someone who was supposed to love them. That's the Amityville Horror. Everything else is just marketing.